Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, great, thank you. So I know I'm personally really excited to be here and part of this global analytics community. I hope each of you are doing well. I've joined for a couple of these, but in case you haven't met me yet, my name is Claire Finley. I am the director for the People Analytics Strategy and Solutions Group here at Genentech. My background is in statistics and in business management consulting, and I've been here for about 2 years now, and I lead a team that focuses on customer engagement. And so our team really focuses on engaging with HR, engaging with our internal business clients, understand their needs, to develop solutions for them. And ultimately, the idea is that each of our customers is really delighted with the experience that they have with People Analytics. So you'll see I've got my email address up there. I would love to make connections. So I'll put this up at the end. If you don't have time to ask questions personally, feel free to reach out to me, make some more connections. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Today, we're going to talk about employee surveys. I know that employee surveys are a big topic. A lot of companies have them. And we'll talk about how Genentech is approaching it a little bit differently. But before we do that, I'd love to give a little bit of context about what's going on here at Genentech, the specific skills and capabilities of People Analytics, and sort of how did we get here and why did we get here. So for those of you that may not know, Genentech is a biotech company. We are in fact the first biotech company that was founded in 1976. We really pride ourselves and we're very passionate about our patients and being innovative to meet unmet medical needs. As we think about the first of our company and think about innovation, we really are the first biotech medicine that was on the market. We were the first with personalized medicine with a therapy called Herceptin. And so we have a very strong focus on innovation that oftentimes takes a very long time to develop. And so as such, our focus on our employees is paramount, both to our leaders and to the culture that we want to create here to retain our talent to make sure that we're really serving our patients. Genentech is based in South San Francisco. We've got about 15,000 employees that work at Genentech, but we're part of a much larger organization. Genentech was founded in 1976, but in 2009, we were integrated with Hoffmann-La Roche, and we're part of a much larger 90,000 employee organization that crosses almost 90 countries around the globe. So to a company like ours, which has both a long-standing history of Roche, where culture is important, but also sitting in South San Francisco, where competition for talent and retaining talent is of the utmost importance, we really want to focus on employee experience. And we know here at Genentech that surveys are a vehicle to provide data for leadership and the organization on how to really maintain that and improve that. But just like every company, our employee surveys have happened. They happen on every other year basis. And there's lots of opportunities that we see with employee surveys, and there's lots of opportunities that leaders need for more data. Now, fortunately for us, we have a really nice People Analytics team that can help us do that. So the Genentech People Analytics team is about 14 people. We range from a really wide range of skills and capabilities, both as data scientists, as data engineers, consultants, analysts, data managers. Our team reports directly into the CHRO of Genentech. Our team has been around for about 3 years, and our charter has always been focused on employee success and team success as a conduit to really reaching the patients. Now, as many of you know, because each of you are part of People Analytics teams, when we first started 3 years ago, a core focus of us was really enabling data access and data insights for HR. And so a big capability for us that continues to be an ongoing strategy has been really promoting data literacy within HR. We do this by making sure that data is easy to access and self-service, and that insights are at the fingertips of those that are interfacing with the business, so that all of HR can be really strong data promoters across across the business. Now, in addition to focusing on data literacy, something we're actually going to talk about today, given the fact that we have a team with about 3 data scientists, is that we do experimental design and surveys as a means to capture data that really bolsters onto your traditional HR data set. So we really focus on being able to capture behavior and sentiment data as a means to drive more actionable insights to the business. Now, since we sit in HR, another core capability of our team is really supporting HR to describe to the business the value that HR brings to business outcomes. And so we really focus on being able to describe how HR activities translate to employee outcomes and how those employee outcomes translate to business outcomes. And another key capability of our team as we think about all of this is that we want to have, especially since we sit in the San Francisco Bay Area, a really technological experience as people engage with people analytics. And so on our team, we have staff of data engineers, developers that help us to build custom tools so that as we're engaging with customers, they have seamless, intuitive experiences. Now, since today we're going to be talking about surveys, I'm going to ask you a survey question to hopefully get some of this conversation started. So in a minute, it's going to pop up on each of your screens and you can fill out the survey. The question I'm going to ask to each of you is, how satisfied is your business with its employee survey? And my thought here is that at the end, hopefully this will start to generate how each of you, sort of the appetite that each of you may be facing for change and how each of you are addressing it. Now, I'll come back to this question at the end, but I'm going to go forward as you guys are thinking about this question. So now let's talk a little bit about Genentech. Let me see if I'm going forward here, and how we've been thinking about employee surveys. I know that I personally, as I think about taking surveys, I'm not thrilled to take my employee survey. Oftentimes when I take surveys, they're very long, they're complicated. And then as a leader, when I receive results, I know that oftentimes it feels like I'm being graded, especially if I've made a lot of effort that year and I really wanted to see much better engagement from my employees. And so oftentimes employee surveys and the results of employee surveys leave me feeling a little bit disappointed and disenchanted. And so it's not surprising that many employees and leaders experience something very similar. They experience surveys being too long, being complicated. Oftentimes employees, as they fill out surveys, don't really know how their responses are going to translate into actions that they want to see. And for leaders, the feeling of disappointment or not understanding how their actions are not translating to results is often one that leaves people with a very negative experience. And so when Genentech started thinking about these typical challenges, we really set out to redesign the experience that employees would have with a survey and the experience that leaders would have with a survey. And the idea here is that having a good experience would lead to positive actions that can be taken and owned by teams and employees and leaders. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, on this slide, about what our design principles were as we thought about reimagining the survey. So the very first piece I think all of us have heard about, we've all heard about pulsing. And pulsing really thinks about how can we be frequent, much more frequent with gathering the data, and also with the design consideration of being shorter. But when we think about surveys being too long, there's a reason for it. We make long surveys because human beings are very complex, and we have a very long list of things that we want to understand about employee and team experiences, which really drive long surveys. And so thinking about the pulse and thinking about wanting to make our surveys shorter to make sure that we can do it more often, we also, most importantly, want to focus on making sure that surveys are very comprehensive. And so there's a balancing act between doing all of these. The second design principle that we're taking forward as we think about surveys is back to this negative experience being the challenge and wanting to flip that. As humans, we often, when we see results, focus on the negative. And what we know from positive psychology is that your actions are much more productive when you focus on your strengths. Because when you focus on your strengths, you get energy and pride, and you spend more time actually changing behaviors in a positive direction. And so we wanted to build this in our employee surveys. A third component that we have built in is not only thinking about the individual and the employee as a single entity, but as we know that with agile ways of working, people are no longer just sitting on functional teams. They're sitting on multiple concepts of teams. They're sitting on project teams. They're part of their day-to-day manager team, but they're also part oftentimes of a bigger organization. And the dynamic of how an employee interacts and feels included within a team is a big dynamic to their overall feeling and experience at work. And so we wanted to emphasize this as part of our surveys. And lastly, as part of our team, we use vendors and survey vendors often as part of our workflow. But as we thought about the redesign of this survey, one of our design considerations was how can we add on and supplement vendor tools by developing in-house custom experiences to make sure that employees have the best experience. So the next thing I'm going to do is go into each of these in more detail and sort of talk about what does each of these look like here at Genentech. But before I do that, I just want to pause and sort of get from each of you, is there anything that you are experiencing that you didn't see listed here, or any design criteria that you are also building in that may be of interest for the discussion?
It'd be great to get the perspectives of each and every one here. Luckily, we're a really small group, so I'm going to have the difficult task, and I'm just going to choose someone. Jean, will you be okay sharing this? We'll just go through one by one.
Yeah, we actually, in my company, I'm for Woodside, by the way, oil and gas company in Australia. We actually quite premature when it came to these employee engagement surveys. So we still use yearly surveys. So we actually are transitioning to do more pulse survey. So that's why I was quite interested to hear from the others, really. So I'm here really to learn rather than, I don't think I've got much to share today.
That's great, Jean. You know, here at Genentech, we also still have our long ongoing survey that gives us that trending over time. One of the things we'll talk about today is that as a strategy, we are trying to supplement each of those with a much more tailored experience on surveys. And so we similarly have an annual survey and we'll continue to do that, but want to supplement it and improve it where we can. All right, so unless there's any other comments, let's go forward and we'll talk about how we make a short, frequent, but comprehensive survey. So, you know, the typical engagement surveys, as we've been talking about, are often lengthy. And the hope or the goal with having a long survey is that you're covering a lot of different topics. But one of the things that when we actually studied our survey that we found is that our survey consists of 72 questions, and it doesn't actually tell us 72 unique pieces of information. In fact, when we studied our survey through a principal component analysis, which helped us to understand the correlation between the questions, we found that actually we weren't learning many new pieces of information besides one or two. And so what this graph is showing you down the left-hand side is individual survey questions that exist on our survey. And on the bottom is the same survey questions. And what we're doing with this matrix is pairing them together to see how correlated each of the questions are. And what you'll notice about this is that essentially the whole color is about the same color. It's all blue. And what this tells us is that there's about one piece of information that we're learning out of 72 questions. In fact, of those 72 questions, 48% of the entire survey could be answered from one question. how positive are you about your organization? You know, this would sort of be equivalent to you walking into your peer's office and saying, hey, Bob, how are you doing? Bob answers, and you say, hey, Bob, what's your mood like today? And Bob answers, and you say, hey, Bob, how are you feeling today? And you're going to get consistently the same answer. So even though you're asking different questions, which may have different topics, the questions sometimes are very correlated to each other. And so you don't actually have to ask 72 questions about how are you feeling today. You can ask one and infer the responses to others. And so this is one of the things that we have thought about, is that asking more questions doesn't necessarily give you more information. So what does good look like on a survey? If we look on the right-hand side of this graph, what an efficient survey would look like is in this principal component analysis, you will see that there's lots of different colors, there's lots of different shading, there's lots of different groupings. And what this is showing us is that you can have lots of different pieces of information, you can still have lots of questions, but you get more analytic capability out of it. And so the goal when we think about surveys is not just to make it short. The goal, we can certainly make a one-question survey, but it won't tell you a lot. The goal is to design the least amount of questions to answer the critical information that you need. So if we're trying to design, and we were, a survey that was efficient, like the right-hand side of this, I want to talk a little bit about how we went about designing that. So the very first step that we go through when we design our surveys is we really want to understand what are the key employee outcomes that we're seeking. And so some big ticket items that we see often is turnover or improved motivation or performance as a key outcome. And what we like to design is sort of the blood pressure check of what are the predictors, the key predictors of that. So turnover is a big topic here for us at Genentech. And the two biggest blood pressure checks to know is turnover a risk, is on a survey, do employees say that they intend to stay at the company? And do they say that they intend to exit the company? And these two simple questions are a really good measure to know, are we at risk of having increased turnover? And once we sort of land with the business on what are the key outcomes and the key predictors, the next thing that we're going to do is, based on research, really think about all of the different components that an employee may experience at work. And so those are some of the common things that you've heard about: psychological safety and collaboration. But they also go into your manager and things like, do you get the resources that you need to do your job? Are you feeling valued? Do you feel included within your team? And so we go through this exercise with the business to understand the list of topics. And once we define the list of topics, we then design the questions themselves. And we design questions with the culture and the employees in mind. And so as I talked about, Genentech is an organization that sits in South San Francisco, but we have a lot of global colleagues. Each of our function has a very different culture. Some cultures have a much more global employee presence. Some cultures are much more local. Different activities that happen within the functions determine different cultures. And so when we design our questions, we really test it both with the leaders and with the functions and employees as a pilot. And so one of those examples may be, we might use very soft language, such as, it's safe for me to speak up and express my views in my team. Or if we're using a much more direct culture like a sales organization, we may say something like, if you make a mistake, it's not held against you. But the goal in question design is really to make sure that when the employee hears it, reads it, they can easily answer the question and they aren't caught up. In this way, you can make the survey feel light, even with having more questions. So the second step is to do just what we showed on the last slide, which is to do the principal component analysis to understand if we're thinking psychological safety is a topic, maybe the leadership has proposed 3 questions. Let's really test, of those 3 questions, are we going to learn 3 pieces of distinct information? And by doing this, we can really say, from your list of questions, here is the shortest set of questions that will answer each of the topics that you want answered. Once we have our topics and our questions, and we know that we've refined that, we design each of the questions around ownership, because we know that actionability is one of the most important things that come out of a survey. We want to make sure that when we ask the question, that it will lend to a result that we can give to a manager, to an organizational leader, or to teams to be able to act. And so if you look at this, what we are actually doing in step 3 is taking the exact same question, but repeating it for what we designed to be the owner. So if you look at recognition as an example, it says leadership recognizes my contribution and value versus my manager recognizes my contribution and value versus my team. And what this is going to do is it's going to set up ownership for results at the end. And it also allows leadership and pilot groups to really define where they see the responsibility landing. So this is the process that we've gone through to land on the right questions. So the next step, once you have launched your survey, we have the right questions, is to share the results. And when we think about the traditional way of seeing results, what we often see is a listing of grades or scores. And when you look at something like this, and these are, again, real results that we have from our survey, what you see is that it's very hard to tell the difference if we look in the middle between an 80.8 and an 81.8. You know, the work environment supports calculated risks. Is that actually worse than it would take me a lot to get me to leave? Where should I focus as a manager? I sort of see it's in the middle, but is it something I should be worried about? Should I be concerned about it? And so when we think about this, there's a couple of key things that we want to change. Scores are an inevitable part of how you run a survey, but it doesn't have to be the prominent thing when we show results of a survey. And so how we've reimagined the survey results is taking the scores and making them invisible. We use them, but we show them in a different way. And the way that we show them is by having a strengths view. And so if you look at a recreation of how we may visualize a strengths view, this would be actual results that we saw on a pilot survey that we did. So the first thing that you'll notice is that there's less questions. It's much easier to focus on what it is I'm looking at, which would be tailored for the audience. And then as you look at the strengths and opportunities, what's actually happening behind the scenes is that we've looked at the scores, we've looked at the confidence intervals, and we are able to determine through this a very easy way to visualize what are your strengths and opportunities. And by looking at it like this, it's much easier to see, hey, I've got about 3 colors there. I've got a nice golden section, I've got sort of a middle whiter section, and then I've got a blue section. And I also really focus on that dark golden area, which tells me that that's a really high strength for our team. I feel included within it. But the other benefit, aside from just having much easier focus and intel on what is my result saying, is this really equips you to compare across groups in a very visual way. So what we can do is compare against other groups, and what easily stands out is where the differences exist. And this is very important if you're a leader, because what you really want to understand as we think about team dynamics and unique capabilities and strengths is where are those opportunities and strengths in the organization to leverage. And so if you look at the bottom, what you'll see is that one of the groups has a really strong strength where across the organization, there's a big opportunity. And so what this equips leaders to do, and this would be more of a leader view, is it really helps you to understand where the opportunities exist, how my organization is doing, and most importantly, it creates a focus on positive dialogue about unique strengths that exist that you can leverage across the organization. So I'll just take a moment before I move on to the next slides and pause there. You know, this really took us a long time to design and think through. Has anybody seen anything like this, or do you have comments or thoughts about how you are perceiving this or reading this?
Okay, I'm gonna have to be the bad guy again. So yeah, let's choose someone other than Jean. Emily, Yvonne, it would be great to get your perspectives on this as well. You know, can you tell us a little bit more? Are you finding similar things to this or different?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Okay. We use a similar sort of heat map. I'm very interested in the shortened view that you're using and the methodology that you went about doing that. But we have not the same colors and not nearly as short as this. We also have an annual process with a lot of questions. But we have started to present it in a heat map sort of way where you see numbers, but you can also see where to focus in a color-coded methodology.
Yeah, that's great, Emily. Interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, we still have a very lengthy general employee survey. What this represents is a much more tailored, targeted survey for a function. And one of the things we notice with using this heat map concept is that even when you have a long list of questions, it still makes it much easier to see where your opportunities are. I'm glad to see that more than one person is using this new skill technique. All right, so this would be what an organizational view would look like. But as we talked about, team health is a really important concept here at Genentech because we're really piloting and experimenting with agile methodology, project teams, short teams. And so we really want to not only understand the organization overall, but how the dynamics of the teams exist. And so as I talked about, we've made sure that the questions really specified who the owners were. And so what this equips us to do is be able to generate very targeted, unique report outs for specific teams. And so we certainly have that organizational view, which we can tailor for leadership. But what this also equips us to do is, in an automatic way, generate project team strengths finders with questions that are tailored for project teams or functional teams where a manager has a set of questions that are important to them. And the idea isn't that we are comparing you as an individual across the team, but rather your view would be, what is your project strengths? What are your functional team strengths to equip you as a team and as a manager to take the action? The idea is we think about best practices with the surveys, and one of the negative experiences that we've heard is that oftentimes employees take the survey, but they don't realize how the action planning is occurring and how changes are being enacted. And by pushing down the results to the lowest point in the organization, you really equip the people who are able to make the most change happen with data. And so our idea is, if you can, in an automatic way, push the reports to the people that want the results, we tend to get a better response. And so as we think about this, these are how we view the results. But on the back end of things, there's a lot of legwork that goes into making sure that employees or surveys are set up, that they're maintained, and that things like this can be automated and generated. And so as we think about how we designed our survey, we've done a lot of experiments with vendors. And what we decided as part of our first pilot with this new concept is that we wanted to bolster the vendors that we used with some in-house custom development. And given that we are a research-based team, a data science-based team, one of our primary requirements as we think about the projects that we do is really the ethics of research and the privacy and security that comes with analytics. And so as we think about tools and vendors, one of the concepts that we want to make sure that we are always instituting is a standard for privacy and security, especially as we think about employee data. And so as we think about how we use vendors, one philosophy can certainly be to have a tool-centric model where vendors generate a lot of the work, they process the data, and they push the data to you. And a lot of times, this is a philosophy and an approach that's used when you oftentimes don't do custom development on your team. But one of the challenges with this is that oftentimes the data becomes siloed and the data becomes passed through sometimes non-secure methods. And so one of our key requirements was really to take a data-first, a data-centric approach to make sure that first and foremost, our data is secured, and then to add on tools and vendors where relevant. But in this way, we can make sure that we centrally have the standards and the compliance that we want to uphold with our research. We can say to customers and to clients that we anonymize your data, that we keep it secure, and that we know how the data is handled. And so as we think about this approach with vendors versus custom development, what we've done with our process is really think about 3 phases for development. And in these phases, we have both combined vendor tools and custom development to make the end-to-end workflow really seamless and best in class in terms of experience. And so as we think about these different phases, we have built a workflow around how do we design and trigger surveys, how do we store and analyze the results, and how do we share those, all while thinking about privacy, accuracy, and analytics. So when we think about the design and triggering, the vendor tools that we use here at Genentech, we use Typeform as our main survey platform. We love to use that tool because it's customizable on the front end, but it also has great mobile functionality. And if we were to custom design that, it would take us a very long time. We also, from a validation standpoint, use things like SurveyMonkey, test our surveys and to validate how people are experiencing them. But we also realized that in this process, one of the things that we did not have that we needed to automate surveys was to custom develop a tool that would identify employee events, generate an email, and launch a survey. And so what we've designed is the ability to infer what employee event changes may happen and to generate an email based on that. So when an employee becomes a new manager for the first time, or when an employee enters an organization or leaves an organization, these are key events that we have defined triggers for and that trigger a survey using Typeform. When we think about how we store and analyze, we use typical things like R and Python. We use dashboard tools like Tableau and Plotly to visualize. But we also use storage tools like AWS from a cloud perspective and Linux servers to store information. But we've built custom developed tools to do natural language processing, to move data from Typeform to the databases, and to anonymize identifiers. And in the sharing component, what we have built is what we call the People Portal. And it's a portal that's linked via single sign-on to deliver multiple types of content, but in a secure, role-based way. And so as we share content, we use tools like Tableau, like Plotly, like PowerPoint, where the customer can receive the information in a means that makes sense to them, but we aren't passing the information via email or in other unsecured ways. And so this overall is how the infrastructure that's behind this looks like. And so I'll pause there and just open it up to see if anybody has any questions about how our infrastructure is built, or challenges or thoughts that each of you have with your infrastructure.
Yeah, I was just curious, Claire, saying that you're quite advanced here. When you choose your population to send your survey, do you also go to the step where they have like a unique identifier at the back end that when they repeat the question, say 12 months later, you could actually measure how they have changed in terms of their response?
Yes. So that is a big component to how we make sure that we have this data-centric model, but also have a really confidential and secure system. So we try to encrypt the identifiers so that as we are trying to tie multiple pieces of information, we don't just have storage of everybody's raw information out there, but we really are able to much more confidentially tie information together. All right, so this has been sort of the 4 basic building blocks and design principles that we took when we redesigned the survey. And so I'll wrap up with a little bit of our lessons learned, and then I would love to hear about from each of you your lessons as you are rethinking, redesigning, or experimenting with your surveys. So as we think about the pilots that we've done with this, one of the key sort of experiences that was a key design principle for us that we've heard is that employees really felt like the survey was light. Now, we didn't have 72 questions, but we also didn't have 3 questions. We had a nice size survey. And so one of the things that has been a lesson for us is that employees can still feel like the survey is light when we make the questions really easy to understand. And so this goes in part to how we've designed on the front end the questions. Now, what we've decided to do is really work with a more tailored approach where we're working with smaller functional groups to supplement larger employee and general engagement surveys to really answer very specific questions that are important to leadership. And so as we tailor our topics and our questions, one of our key takeaways from this is spending time to bolster with academic research and literature that exists. What are the topics? Ensure that you get a comprehensive survey while also still feeling light. The second thing that we've learned through this experience is that the survey itself can be much shorter. Going through a process of really understanding the correlations between the questions and being able to advise the business that even though you want to ask all of these questions, if we really just ask one, it's going to tell us all of these same pieces of information, has really helped us to make the survey light. And lastly, one of the key pieces that we consistently focus on just for scalability and capacity of our team is always about automation. And so we aren't, for 15,000 employees, that big of an engine and of a team to support lots of different manual surveys. And so we have to think about how can we do this in an automated way. And one of the design benefits that automation provides, not only for scale of our team, but it really addresses that employee experience of when they fill out a survey, they want to know what the results are and what are the actions being taken. And by sharing the results very quickly, because we've set it up in an automated way, and by pushing the responsibility down to managers and employees with relevant information and things that they can own, the results and the information that employees receive are much more positive. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and open it up for discussion about sort of how people are both from a survey standpoint, what's the appetite for change within your organization, as well as how each of you select the topics and design the surveys that each of you are thinking about now.
Awesome, Claire. Thank you so much for sharing that detailed journey. That was absolutely amazing. I just want to pull up the polling results here for you. Maybe you can give a little bit of context to that as well, Claire. So take a look here. I think, is this what you was expecting, or is this a little bit different?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think with surveys, there sometimes is a really wide range of experiences where, for me personally, I've done the traditional employee survey for a really long time in a lot of companies. And so when I take the traditional annual employee survey, I often may say that I'm neutral or unsatisfied as an employee because I'm sort of used to that experience. And so I know one of the things that we see is sort of pockets or really key differentiated areas of the business where especially leaders that are trying to make decisions or seek insights that are helping them do very specific things might be very unsatisfied because the engagement survey doesn't help them to answer that specific question. And so to me, this is a testament that some of the employee surveys and engagement surveys have probably really been worked on and improved. Pulsing, keeping it short, focusing on the employee experience seems to be a common experience that some of you are having with having very satisfied or satisfied experiences in your business. And then also, there may be pockets of the unsatisfied category where the engagement survey addresses some of the things that they want to know about general motivation, general predictors, but may not always answer those key business questions. So I'm really curious from each of you, especially those ones that answered with satisfied and very satisfied. Maybe you can share a little bit about that and how do you keep your business really satisfied with your surveys?
Yeah, this is Andrew from Unilever, North America, and I actually really enjoyed your presentation. I think you guys are a little ahead of us in terms of what you guys are doing. But just to share with you guys what we're doing, we have a proprietary tool that we're using currently, and we just switched to we have pulse surveys, and then we have one big one in the fall, sometime around September, October. And I just like the idea of, so kind of the output is usually in percentages, but I like that idea of the heat map where especially leadership could see, like at a quick glance, what they need to change, or, where are the pain points and where are the opportunities versus where are their strengths. Recently, I don't know, I wanted your opinion on this. Recently, we switched our pulse surveys to kind of mimic Glassdoor, but this is in-house and not outside. So we want to be so we'll be taking pulse surveys every month and making sure that no one is repeated. But I want your kind of opinion on what you think of this. And it's just kind of like a rating from, 1 through 5 or 1 through 5 stars. And so that's what the survey experience would be like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, having that pulse concept is great, both because you don't have to sample everyone, and two, you sort of see, especially as there are changes within the business, if there are statistical changes that are happening with the experience that people are having.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we often like to do is do more of this star concept, and when we see problems, then dig in a little bit deeper. There's no sense in pulsing everybody with 20 questions every single month if there isn't a problem right now. But when there is a problem, doing it monthly really enables you to be able to more quickly then respond and do deeper dives. And one of the things that we've learned about our surveys is that oftentimes there's a very different experience based on the tenure of the employee or based on the employee event. And so one of the things we watch out for is that when we go through hiring increases, we see really big spikes in motivation because new employees are often very motivated, versus when you have tenured employees who may be there 5-10 years, their motivation sort of keeps a much more sort of maintained line. And so those are two key things that we've learned to watch out for is what is the proportion of new to tenured employees.
I actually wanted to mention that. So just to clarify, your employee survey kind of takes into account attrition and anything related to the employee. So how we do it is that we actually have like one kind of pulse and one we call it unit voice, kind of like the voice survey. But we also have like a separate attrition survey. We have something called, we have different teams or functions. I will call them groups, not functions, but so we have surveys for that. So it's kind of separated, and I kind of like that, a survey triggers when they have an event. So I just want to know, maybe we can connect further on how that you automated that process or things like that. And I also like that you're using PCA analysis to kind of compare the different questions. So I would like to know more about that also.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to connect later in more detail. Something that Jean sort of talked a little bit about was around making sure that the IDs are anonymous, and making sure that they're encrypted and confidential, because one of the things that we do like to do is ask people when they enter and when they exit for the reasons for exit and entry. But we use the pulses to really infer based on tenure what the differences are in levels of motivation or key variables that we want to study. And so when we look at the exit and entry, we often don't use those as sort of the main means for finding out differences, but we really segment the results in this confidential way and then tie the reasons that they've entered for purposes of things like recruiting and marketing and why they've exited when we think about action planning, and maybe they share a little bit of a different experience than they would on a pulse with us. So we use the exit and entry certainly to support reasons, and then we use the pulse and we segment based on tenure to get some of this information out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Curious to know when you decided to, I suppose for your purposes, you are supplementing your pulse survey with your annual surveys. What steps do you take, I suppose, to almost to communicate to your employees about what's the reasoning for the pulse surveys. And my question in the context is more of like, in my company, we feel that the employees are getting inundated with surveys, and we're not sure if we should do the pulse surveys because we're not sure what's the take-up rate is going to be. And, I myself as an employee get surveyed every other, all the types of different types of surveys. I'm curious to know how you go about, convincing employees that this is actually a good survey to do, and and you get a good participation rate.
Yeah, so it's a great question. We often as a team sort of decide to go where the energy is, and so we often use where a leader is really wanting to drive a certain action or a certain change as a mechanism to be able to then provide recommendations or analytics to support that decision. And so often what we recommend to our leaders that they think about is not only what's the reason behind the survey, but we on the front end want to make sure the leader is willing to take actions when they get results. And so what we recommend in terms of a communication is that the leader really hold people accountable to filling out the surveys, because the leader is accountable ultimately to a desire to change an action or behavior or result. And so when we frame the communication, there's usually a context and an important reason for why. So as one of the examples of one of the surveys that we did, there was a lot of conversations about a lack of feeling safe to speak up. And the leader really wanted to create a really positive, inclusive culture for the organization. And so by the leader really framing it is there is a burning platform for why we're doing the survey. And the intent is that leadership will take action, and we will equip each manager and employee with the information that they need to take action. It sets on the front end a stage for why it's important and what actions will result. And the other sort of second thing that we encourage leaders to do, especially with pulses, is model and to demonstrate the positive actions that you want and anticipate, especially with response rates, that you may get a big uptick by really encouraging a survey. But what's going to be more encouraging is over time, when they see that the survey lends itself to something that's of benefit to the employee, they will want to take the survey more. So the second thing we really encourage leaders to do is be consistent, continue to model those behaviors, and continue to show employees the benefit of them providing their feedback.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Yvonne, I know that you've been trying to get a couple of questions in and every time it seems like we've beat you to it. So here's your stage. I hope you can go ahead now, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
It's the first time I try out my new Bluetooth headphone.
Very cool.
Wow. Yeah, so what I don't have a question, Claire. So first, thank you for the brilliant presentation. I've worked for different corporates, and what I must say, in most corporates, every 1 to 2 years, an engagement service will be done. Yeah, this is what it is also fact today. Yeah, and you have long questionnaires, very complicated questionnaires, and not only for the employees, but also for them who did the analysis of these questionnaires. Yeah, maybe it's not a German, it's not only a German topic, because I work also for international corporates, and I think it's time for change. And I'm very happy that you shared your experience with us, because I think we are in this change, because I think it's more necessary to have more short, a kind of pulse surveys. You have to raise the right question, what you as a company need to gain, need to investigate. You try to reach out the pain points, and not every 1 to 2 years, and everybody says, oh, again, a big survey. And in my experience in these big surveys, it always comes to 4 points. It is money is not enough, yeah, communication, lack of leadership, and the last one, what was it? Content of work, yeah, content of work is not clear or not enough. Yeah, it's like Gallup. it's just what they did with this big service is the same what Gallup did since 20 years. And that's why I think it's absolutely necessary to have short questionnaires, in a short time, and raise the right questions, raise more the pain points. And you can also use this then for your analytics.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. You know, I can't agree and mirror our experience more to what you described. You know, one of the things that we on the analytics team actually really wanted to add as a question was, do you feel like the processes are easy? And leadership really pushed actually back on us and said, if they come back and say it's horrible, we know that already. We're working on it. And this isn't a piece of information we need to know right now. Same thing with compensation. We really pushed to have, do you feel like you are compensated fairly? And leadership pushed back and said, even if they hate it, there's not much we're going to do about that. And so, you know, I think the intent of having these surveys is that we really care as a business about our employees. And so we really care to ask all the questions. And what we have to think about is the expense that it costs employees to spend their time to do it. And the expense when they fill it out and say, I don't feel compensated fairly, and nothing is going to result, the experience that happens. And so I think it's a combination of sort of bringing that we know the intent is good and working together to really agree on what are the things that we don't know that we need information on, and what are the things that we're willing to change, so that when we get the results, if they aren't good, we're willing to do something about it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Claire, one thing I didn't get, and maybe I just completely missed this, but originally you had 72 questions and you managed to whittle that down. What sort of number are we looking at now?
So as I mentioned, we actually are keeping our big annual engagement survey. I don't know what that question list will get to. The intent with that question is that it's general for every function, for every business, for every employee. The much more targeted one that we did, that we showed an example of, had 18 questions on it and 2 open text questions. And so we kept it to 20. Initially, when we were talking with leadership, they said no more than 10 questions. But when we started going through the topics and we let them pilot the survey with a much more direct questions that were hitting all of the points that they wanted, they said, we can go up from 10. Let's just pick the right number that will answer the questions that we need. And so we landed on 20 questions for those results that you saw. Similarly to what I've heard others share about their pulses, we also have a 5-question pulse that we run that's very specific to speaking up and feeling included on the team. And so I would say that it really ranges. My guess is if you're trying to get a really comprehensive list of the employee experience, it may be something more like 20 to 50 questions. If you want something more targeted, it could be less.